When Yahweh promised the land to his people, he wasn't offering a gift. He was declaring war. Not against men, but against the old gods. Canaan was no empty territory. It was the domain of ancient powers. El, Baal, Asherah, names that echoed older lords, older thrones, tracing back to the Anunnaki. To promise this land was to provoke a war. And that's exactly what the Lord of Armies intended to do. And the echoes of that war can still be felt, even today. Welcome to the War of the Ancient Gods. From the ziggurats of Sumer to the high places of Canaan, this ground bore witness not only to kings and empires, but to gods, real gods. The kind who ruled by fire and decree, whose names echoed in stone, in sky, and in DNA. War is older than nations, older than writing, older even than man. And in the land we now call the Promised Land, stretching from Mesopotamia to the eastern Mediterranean, something deeper pulses beneath the soil. A mystery both sacred and violent, preserved in clay tablets, shattered walls, and scorched cities. To conventional history, these are the ruins of Bronze Age city-states: Ur, Babylon, Mari, Megiddo, Jericho. But their destruction patterns, cyclical, synchronized, and absolute, suggest something more, something that transcends geopolitics. Not merely the greed of kings, but the convulsions of something greater. The War of the Gods. From the tablets of Sumer, there were records of the final war. It's there, referred to by scholars as the Laments of Sumer. But they also appear in the Era epic and in other records all over the place. According to the Anunnaki timeline, as reconstructed by researchers like Zecharia Sitchin in the Lost Book of Enki, the final war among the gods culminates in catastrophe, a great nuclear exchange over the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But collapse did not mean disappearance. The divine war fractured the old order, but its jurisdictional shadows lingered. Sacred sites, genetic lines, technological relics, local cults. These continued like sparks beneath ash. When Yahweh arrives, claiming territory, standing behind trumpet blasts and falling walls, he is not rising from a void. He is entering a field already sown by other gods. His war is not a new war, it is a jurisdictional transfer, the cleanup operation of a broken divine administration. Joshua's conquest becomes a divine reinstallation, a new Elohim asserting command where others once ruled. The ancient gods may had gone silent, but their territories remained active and they may operate in shadows. It is the same war. Even the Hebrew Bible records it in layers of myth and history. Deuteronomy 32:8 preserves a stunning verse. When El Elyon divided the nations, he fixed their boundaries according to the number of the sons of Elohim, a world partitioned not just by geography, but by celestial politics. This land, Canaan, was not empty, it was already a divine zone. And the gods who ruled it were not silent. Two factions, one strict, one rebellious. One holds the codes, the taboos. The other, the fire of knowledge. Enlil and his loyalists enforce distance. They build barriers, holy mountains, forbidden names, human obedience. Enki and Marduk defy. They seed life, share tools, breed lines, spark rebellion, and always the battlefield is earth. Jericho's walls fall not just to trumpet blasts, but to time's layered wars. Hazor burns, rebuilt, burns again. Megiddo, Armageddon, becomes prophecy by repetition. Each layer of ash a failed peace treaty. The Late Bronze Age collapse, circa 1200 BCE, strikes suddenly. Egypt falters, the Hittites vanish, Canaan fractures. Scholars point to sea peoples, drought, rebellion. But perhaps the cause is above, a final rupture among the watchers. Human memory calls them angels. Myths name them gods. Texts reveal them as Elohim, the so-called gods, the Anunnaki, the aliens that once ruled the earth. Overseers, commanders, custodians of zones, and in the end, a new name rises, Yahweh. He arrives not from obscurity, but from appointment. A God-given dominion, not God with a capital G, but a common God. His territory, Canaan, his people, a chosen remnant, his claim, inheritance. The wars that follow are not only political, they are celestial disputes fought through human hands. In the book of Joshua, the conquest of the Promised Land is narrated, but this is not merely recount conquest, it records transition, a shift in divine administration. The Promised Land was not promised to men, it was transferred among gods. The echoes persist. Each time a temple rises on contested ground, an older one sleeps beneath. Each time a king claims holy right, he stands on the bones of another's covenant. The wars have not ended, they have changed uniforms. And still, the land bears witness, from Sinai to Zion, from Megiddo to Babylon. The soil remembers, because it was never just a battleground, it was a throne. And we are still fighting this war. Before Yahweh's emergence in the biblical narrative, the land that would become the Promised Land was already considered sacred. It was not an empty stage awaiting divine command, but a region layered in ritual, theology, and imperial politics. Long before the Israelites arrived, Canaan functioned as a geopolitical and spiritual corridor. Its cities governed not only by kings, but also by gods, whose names carried ancestral weight. In the Late Bronze Age, Canaan was a patchwork of city-states like Megiddo, Hazor, and Lachish, each fortified, each ruled by a local king. These kings, however, were not fully sovereign. Their allegiance lay with the Egyptian pharaoh, who was not only a political emperor, but a divine figure in his own right. This theocratic political system is clearly recorded in the Amarna letters, a set of clay tablets discovered in Egypt, written in Akkadian, the diplomatic lingua franca of the time. These letters, dating to the 14th century BCE, are filled with messages from Canaanite rulers to the Egyptian pharaoh, addressing him as, "My lord, my son." They request military support, report on rivalries, and reaffirm loyalty. But what stands out is the language. Kings refer to themselves as your servant, and to Pharaoh as a godlike overlord. This reveals a system where earthly governance was tied directly to divine hierarchy. Simultaneously, the spiritual framework of these regions was well established. At Ugarit, a major Canaanite city on the northern coast, modern-day Ras Shamra, Syria, texts and rituals preserved in clay give us one of the clearest windows into the religious thought of the region. These texts describe a structured pantheon, headed by El, the chief deity, followed by Baal, the warrior storm god, and Asherah, the divine mother and consort of El. El is portrayed as a patriarchal figure, wise and distant, presiding over a council of gods. Baal appears as the vigorous challenger, a god of storms, war, and seasonal renewal, who frequently contends with other forces like Yam, the sea, or Mot, the death. Asherah functions as the nurturing and maternal element in the pantheon, associated with fertility and creation, often linked to sacred groves or trees. These divine roles evoke parallels to Mesopotamian figures. El shares characteristics with Enlil, the high authority and supreme decision-maker of the Anunnaki hierarchy. Baal mirrors elements of Marduk, or possibly Ninurta, both of whom emerge in stories as stormbringers and divine warriors. Asherah bears similarity to Ninhursag, the life-giving goddess tied to creation and genetics in Sumerian lore. However, these are not direct identifications. Rather, they suggest a diffusion of religious models and roles, archetypal positions that recur across cultures with local variation. The comparisons offer possible paths of cultural transmission, not equations. The deities reflect similar cosmic functions, but emerge from distinct historical and theological contexts. The presence of a divine council is another shared element. Ugaritic texts refer to it as the Assembly of the Holy Ones, a celestial court that deliberates divine policy. This resonates with Psalm 82 in the Hebrew Bible. In both traditions, divinity is pluralized, organized, and administrative, not chaotic or singular in form. What this reveals is that the land of Canaan, before any biblical claim, was already structured under a divine political model. Its kings were subordinate not only to Pharaoh, but to gods whose roles were established, whose authority extended across generations. Worship wasn't localized superstition. It was embedded in statecraft, territory, and identity. In this context, the arrival of Yahweh represents not the introduction of a god into a vacuum, but the emergence of a new contender in an already divided and theologically managed landscape. The promise of land wasn't an offer made in an unclaimed wilderness. It was a transfer of jurisdiction, a divine reassignment in a zone already governed. Artifacts across the region reinforce this continuity. Cylinder seals bearing mixed Mesopotamian and Levantine symbols, temple structures following familiar architectural patterns, inscriptions that preserve older names long after regimes shift. These are the echoes of inherited sacred space, territory where divine administration was long underway before any biblical transformation. Thus, before it was ever called promised, this land was already governed, venerated, and divided. It was the land of the gods, of pantheons, councils, and inherited power. In this context, Yahweh's arrival was not merely a theological event. It was a declaration of sovereignty. He did not emerge from the existing Canaanite divine order. He arrived from the south, from the deserts of Edom, Seir, Paran, and Teman, and when he did, he came as a challenger. The Hebrew texts preserve these coordinates. Deuteronomy 33:2 reads, "Yahweh came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon them. He shone forth from Mount Paran." Judges 5:4-5 recalls, "Yahweh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth trembled." Habakkuk 3:3 speaks of the Eloah from Teman. These aren't vague poetic images. They chart a movement, a southern origin for a deity advancing into contested land. Egyptian records from the New Kingdom include references to a people called the Shasu of Yahweh in the southern Transjordan and Negev regions. These Shasu, described as semi-nomadic, are possibly among the first human groups associated with Yahweh. And in the Midianite hypothesis, we find a deeper link. Moses encounters Yahweh while tending flocks for Jethro, a priest of Midian. This suggests that Yahweh's earliest worship may have originated with metalworking clans in the Timnah region, a mobile, desert-based culture with shrine tents and divine patrons. This origin story is not incidental. It marks Yahweh as a god of motion, of transition, of encampments. The tabernacle, Israel's first sanctuary, is not a temple. It is a mobile headquarters. It moves with the people. It carries his name, his presence, his voice. This suits a deity establishing territorial control in active conflict zones. And with this movement comes law. The Israelite covenant with Yahweh, recorded in Deuteronomy and Exodus, is structured like the suzerainty treaties of the Late Bronze Age. It includes a preamble, historical prologue, stipulations, witnesses, blessings, and curses. It binds the people to a divine suzerain. From the historian's perspective, this mirrors the international treaties of Hittite kings and Egyptian pharaohs. From the ancient astronaut perspective, it signals an operational alignment, a population brought under command authority. The law is not merely moral, it is political, legal, ritual. It outlines territorial boundaries, cultic obligations, penalties for treason. The Ark of the Covenant is considered a religious artifact and an administrative core. Carried on poles, sealed from touch, voice activated by the divine name, it behaves less like symbol and more like a secure device and a weapon. The theological distinctiveness of Yahweh lies in his claim to exclusivity. Unlike Baal or El, Yahweh tolerates no rivals. You shall have no other Elohim before my face. This is not only spiritual loyalty, it is a geopolitical severance. To follow Yahweh is to exit the jurisdiction of older gods, to break with the council, to reject the ancestral patrons of the region. But this shift does not happen in abstraction. It is enforced through covenant, through law, through war. Yahweh's arrival coincides with the Late Bronze Age collapse, a regional breakdown of older empires. Egypt retreats, the Hittites fall, city-states fracture. Into this power vacuum steps a new suzerain. Yahweh, backed by a mobile priesthood, a lethal ark, and a legal code, begins to install a new order. His presence is marked by his name, placed at sanctuaries, recited in rituals, encoded in blessings and curses. The name is not only identity, it is authorization. To place his name somewhere is to mark it as under his command. The temple is not yet built, but already there is structure. The camp, the ark, the Levites, each follows protocols. Contact with the ark without clearance brings death. Unauthorized sacrifices are forbidden. Entry into the inner sanctuary is tightly controlled. The conflict with Baal, another storm god, popular across the Levant, is particularly sharp. Though both share imagery of thunder, clouds, and mountain descent, the biblical texts work to separate them. Baal is associated with fertility rites, cultic sex, and often child sacrifice. Yahweh rejects these practices, asserting a different ethic and authority. The distinction is not just moral, it is jurisdictional. Worship of Baal means allegiance to another sovereign. And so every law, every ritual, every procession reinforces the break. The Jordan River becomes a boundary, crossed only under Yahweh's command. Cities like Jericho fall not just by military might, but by resonance. The ark moves, horns blast, walls collapse. These are not random miracles. They are demonstrations of a superior protocol. The concept of harem, total devotion of conquered peoples and their goods to Yahweh, functions as both spiritual command and genetic purge. It eliminates rival bloodlines, clears space for covenantal purity. This will grow sharper in coming chapters, but already the principle is visible. This is more than faith. It is colonization by a divine power. He arrives not as a reformer within the council of gods, but as a rival asserting dominion. His ark is a throne, his tabernacle a campaign tent, his name a seal, and his people, bound by oath, shaped by law, trained for war, are the human expression of his claim. The land will not accept him quietly. Older gods still hold sway. Their high places still rise. Their symbols still linger. But the new suzerain has entered the field. The war for inheritance has begun. But it wasn't just a war among the gods. In those times, the earth was inhabited not only by the gods who descended from the heavens, but also by their sons, the Benai Elohim, the sons of the Elohim, the sons of the Anunnaki. And beyond them, the humans and all their descendant peoples, there were also the Nephilim, the offspring of the Benai Elohim and human women. They are mentioned in texts such as the Book of Enoch, the Genesis of the Hebrew Bible, the Book of Giants, and others. In the Book of Joshua, when the story of the conquest of the Promised Land by Yahweh and his chosen people is told, other nations inhabited those regions, rivals of Enlil, El, Yahweh, and their entire clan. Alongside the gods, there are also references to the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, and others. Names that echoed with fear through mountain strongholds and shadowed valleys. Their origins, as preserved in Genesis 6, began with an encounter between the Benai Elohim and the Benot Ha-Adam. The sons of the Elohim descended, saw the daughters of men, and took them. The result was the Nephilim, beings described as Gibberim, mighty ones of old, men of name. These unions were not forgotten. They were remembered as disruptions, genetic, political, territorial. The giants did not simply exist, they ruled. Hebron, Bashan, and the ridgelines across Transjordan were dominated by names tied to this ancestry. The sons of Anak, said to descend from the Nephilim, held the heights of Hebron. In Bashan, Og ruled as king, his legacy sealed in iron, his stature immortalized in stone. The Rephaim were not only remembered for their size, but for their roots in funerary cults. They were honored as ancestral powers, invoked in rites that reinforced the legitimacy of their living descendants. Canaan and its borderlands, Moab, Ammon, Bashan, formed a patchwork of these hybrid incumbents. The Emim and Zamzumim of Transjordan were described as great and many, tall as the Anakim. The land was not only occupied but guarded by lines that bore celestial signatures. Archaeology traces these memories in stone. Dolmens, tumuli, and standing circles mark Bashan and Golan. Rujim el-Hiri, with its concentric stone rings, stands as a silent archive of elite burial practices. In Ugaritic texts, the Rephaim appear as exalted ancestors, present in royal liturgy, tied to the gods by blood and veneration. The role of bloodline extended beyond stature. To rule, one needed origin, divine origin. Hybrid ancestry served as justification for power. Gilgamesh, remembered as two-thirds divine, walked this same tradition. So too the Apkallu, the semi-divine sages of Mesopotamia, appearing before and after the flood, guiding kings, preserving knowledge. The pattern is not unique to Canaan. Egypt, too, carved reliefs showing gods begetting pharaohs. Greece would later call these beings demigods, but in Canaan they were warriors and kings, and they stood between Yahweh and the land. The covenant forged in Sinai required a clean claim. The hybrid dynasties were not only a challenge of might, they represented an overlapping jurisdiction. Their blood anchored Canaan to rival Elohim, to lineages born outside the bounds of divine law. The Watchers, as later texts such as 1 Enoch name them, had violated their station, passing knowledge and seed without sanction. When the ark crossed the Jordan, it did not do so into neutral ground. It entered a region organized by blood and cult, by ancient alliances reinforced through ancestral rites. The physical structures of these alliances remained: standing stones, high places, groves, and altars. The spiritual structures, however, were more deeply embedded in the names of the giants, in their children, in the fear they inspired. The harem, the ban of total destruction, was not indiscriminately applied. It followed lines. In Hebron, the sons of Anak were targeted. In Bashan, Og of the Rephaim was destroyed. In Moab and Ammon, the Emim and Zamzumim were purged. Joshua's campaign focused on cities that represented hybrid strength, fortified, elevated, and bound by blood to the sons of the gods. Later texts preserved remnants. In the coastal cities, Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, fragments of these lineages survived. Goliath of Gath was not merely a soldier, he was part of this continuity. His height, his weapons, his defiance, all tied to a heritage that the early Israelite texts recorded with both awe and purpose. To remove the hybrids was to break the link between land and rival patronage. The law given to Israel reinforced this separation. No intermarriage, no covenant, no veneration of their gods. The Asherah poles and Massabot were to be destroyed. Purity was not a mere ritual demand, it was a geopolitical boundary. Every alliance of blood or cult carried the risk of reattachment to forbidden power. Within the priestly structure, Levi was charged with maintaining this boundary. The ark was their responsibility, not only its transport, but its sanctity. To touch it without protocol meant death. The tabernacle was access-controlled space, layered zones, veiled passages, guarded thresholds. This system reflected more than reverence. It reflected order, a system designed to preserve a lineage, a chain of custody, and a claim. What began in Genesis 6 did not end with the flood. The text says, and also afterward, and in the time of the conquest of the so-called Promised Land, it appears very clear. The sons of the Elohim continued to influence the world through descendants, through kingdoms, through the resistance that Yahweh's people would face. The land was not empty. Every valley, hill, and gate was already named, guarded, and sworn. What Yahweh's people entered was not just a terrain, it was a lattice of loyalties, bound by blood and oath to gods who had ruled long before the tabernacle crossed the Jordan. The cities of Canaan were fortified mounds, each one a seat of a small kingdom. These were not isolated dwellings, but command posts, palace-temple complexes set atop tells, fitted with cisterns, granaries, and gates that regulated access to the surrounding lands. Each was a node in a regional network of divine oversight. The king ruled, but his authority flowed from the deity enthroned in the temple beside him. Hebron and Debir were held by the Anakim, giants of old memory, whose stature was both physical and symbolic. Their roots reached back to the Nephilim. Their presence was more than military. It was a genetic claim, living proof of divine human union, an anchor for the jurisdiction of their patrons. These highlands formed the spine of the land. To snap them would be to paralyze the old structure. In the north, Bashan was ruled by Og of the Rephaim. The plateau he controlled overlooked the eastern entry to the land and protected the northern flanks. His iron bed, noted in the scrolls, signaled more than size. It was the relic of a legacy tied to ancestral rights. His domain stood at the convergence of memory and strategy. To the east, Moab and Ammon preserved stories of the Emim and Zamzumim, peoples great and tall as the Anakim. Along the coast, new powers had landed. The Philistine cities, Gaza, Gath, Ashkelon, carried the imprint of Aegean descent. Their weapons bore iron. Their shrines bore other gods. In time, they would shelter the final remnants of the giants. Jerusalem, still called Jebus, held the central ridge. Its spring, Gihon, fed the city and symbolized its enduring control. The Jebusites ruled from a fortress embedded in the highland corridor. Their oaths and altars kept them bound to the older pantheon. These peoples were not merely enemies. They were extensions, political and biological, of the earlier divine regime. Standing stones, Massabat, Asherah poles, and Bamot crowned the hills. Each cult object was a beacon. Each oath was a contract. The gods of old had not disappeared. They were encoded in the landscape. Treaties between cities were sworn before these gods. To break the treaty was to invoke divine wrath. War was not simply expansion. It was sacrilege, rebellion, judgment. The conquest unfolded within a legal and spiritual framework older than Sinai. Every destroyed altar was a severed contract. Every defeated king a fallen proxy. But not all were destroyed. Gibeon sought a treaty and was spared. Their oath complicated the campaign. Yahweh's law had to reckon with inherited agreements. This was not indiscriminate warfare. The harem was deployed with precision. Jericho, Ai, Hazor, Hebron, each was targeted for its strategic position and its connection to rival lineage or cultic infrastructure. Some cities were burned, others were absorbed. The decision traced a logic. Where hybrid lines held sway, where oaths bound the land to another name, there the purge came. Where political submission was possible and contamination contained, treaties were made. Behind each campaign was the strategy of jurisdiction. To replace the name on the land, the former names had to be erased, not only from speech but from stone, not only from the present but from ancestry. High places were torn down. The land itself was not only geography, it was contested inheritance. To transfer control, the old claims had to be dismantled. Lineages rooted in forbidden unions, cities named for other gods, and rituals that invoked powers outside the covenant. In this war, the battlefield was both physical and genealogical. To walk the land as Yahweh's people, they had to first overwrite the old grid of blood and cult, of stone and oath. Only then could the name begin to dwell. Cities burned, palaces fell, and the names of gods vanished from stone. Across the eastern Mediterranean, fire swept through the world's mightiest kingdoms, and the sky turned red with the smoke of old orders dying. Within a single century, the system unraveled. Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire, was abandoned, its archives turned to ash. Ugarit, the coastal gem of northern Syria, fell in a blaze so sudden that the last letter left on a scribe's desk warned, "Enemy ships are visible. The city is burning." In Greece, the palaces of Mycenae crumbled. Trade routes collapsed. The Bronze Age ended not by transition, but by annihilation. Egypt repelled the attackers but lost its empire. Canaan's lowland cities, Hazor, Lachish, Megiddo, Ashkelon, show destruction layers marked not just by ruin, but by intensity. Vitrified walls, melted stone, silent abandonment. The survivors left no chronicles of victory, only gaps in memory. Writing systems vanished. Rituals continued without voices. To scholars, it was systemic collapse, drought, famine, migration, invasions. But its synchrony is striking. The fall came like a single chord struck across the region. It does not read like decay, it reads like judgment. The old texts speak of fire. Storms turned day to night. The gods warred in the heavens, and their wrath scorched the earth. In these accounts, it is not metaphor, it is a weapon. The Hebrew scrolls remember a fire that burns to the depths of Sheol, that sets the foundations of the mountains aflame. Psalm songs describe a sky split by smoke, quaking earth, and a chariot of storm. The voice of Yahweh rides lightning and cloud, but he is not alone in this imagery. It echoes older wars, the convulsions of the divine order fracturing into ash. Egyptian reliefs show Ramses III rallying his armies against the Sea Peoples, unnamed forces that rise like chaos itself. Ugarit's final prayers cry for the return of Baal and Dagon, but no answer came. The gods had withdrawn before the flames arrived. The collapse was not only political, it was theological. The council shattered, the old patrons fell, their temples remained, but their presence ceased. The line of kings was broken, the rites lost their force. And then, in the silence, a new signal stirred. Yahweh, rising from the southern fringe, Sinai, Seir, Paran, entered not into a world of competing gods, but into the void they left behind. His conquest was not a rebellion, it was succession. As the old factions destroyed each other, one remained untouched by their war. From his command zone in the wilderness, he advanced through a land still smoking from the last divine conflict. The gods did not return. Their memories remained, dolmens, tablets, altars. Their bloodlines were hunted down. Their voices, once heard in the councils of heaven, now lingered only in ruin. Yahweh did not replace the old gods. He survived them. The ark moved through an emptied world, its carriers stepping over the bones of fallen empires. The laws it bore were not suggestions. They were protocols for a world no longer governed by plurality. The council had ended. A new administration had begun. What came next was not empire. It was covenant. What rose in place of palaces and idols was a tabernacle in motion. Portable, guarded, alive. The age of fire ended in silence, and in that silence, the name of Yahweh lives. In the wake of fire and silence, one object moved through the ruins. It was not buried in a tomb nor sealed in a mountain vault. It traveled in a tent, carried on poles, guarded by men who could not touch it. It was called the Ark. To the untrained eye, it was a gilded chest, acacia wood overlaid with gold, precise in its dimensions, crowned by two winged figures facing each other. But what it did marked it as something else. When it advanced before armies, walls collapsed. When it was seized by enemies, their bodies broke out in sores and their gods fell face down. When it was mishandled, it killed without warning. And when it rested in its sanctum, a voice was said to speak from the space between the wings, not metaphorically, but audibly. Its interior was off limits. Its surface could not be touched. Its proximity was dangerous. Only one tribe could carry it, and even then, only by its poles. When one man reached out to steady it, Uzzah, a well-meaning hand, he died on the spot, not as punishment, as reaction. The Philistines captured it and placed it in their temple. In the morning, their statue of Dagon was shattered, and tumors broke out among the people. They sent it away, terrified. What they had taken was not loot. It was a live device. The Ark was the last operational technology of the old world. It did not need to explain itself. It functioned. It defended itself. It emitted. The tabernacle that housed it was a mobile containment unit. Insulated curtains, smoke screens, layered access zones. The priests who ministered around it followed strict purity codes, not to impress holiness upon the object, but to survive its field. Its construction details are exact, 2.5 cubits by 1.5, overlaid with conductive gold, shaped with precision. The cherubim above formed a twin terminal structure. The materials suggest resonance. The protocols suggest containment. The legends suggest consequence. The glory that appeared above it, kavod, was not abstract. It had weight. It had effect. It could kill. Inside the chest, the tablets of the covenant were stored. Stone documents, but not inert. They marked the legal transfer of command. To carry the ark was to carry a signature, the active authorization of Yahweh's jurisdiction. When Moses entered to receive instruction, it was from between the cherubim. This was not ceremony. It was command protocol. In battle, the ark was a signal corps. It went ahead of troops, and outcomes changed. At Jericho, sound waves were directed in unison, blasts of trumpets and shouted voices around the ark. The city fell without assault, its walls imploded. Elsewhere, when the ark was present without sanction, the energy turned inward. Friendly fire, confusion, collapse. The ark made Israel a vectorized people, not a large empire but a mobile command platform. Their strength was not in numbers but in what they carried. And then it stopped. When the ark entered Solomon's temple, the tabernacle was retired. The tent was folded. The movement ended. The ark was set inside a stone chamber behind layered doors. From that moment forward, it never spoke again. No fire, no voice, no outbreak, silence. The protocols continued, but the core went dark. Whether the power was spent or the system sealed, no text says. What remains is memory, a box no longer opened, kept behind veil and myth. Eventually, it disappears entirely. But for a time, through war and wilderness, one artifact hummed with the authority of gods. It burned without burning. It guided without moving. It killed without aiming. It was weapon, witness, throne. It was the last device of the divine age, and when it ceased, the heavens closed. In the beginning, Yahweh moved with his people, a fire by night, a voice in a tent, a power that marched and struck and spoke. But eventually, he stopped moving. The ark was placed, the tent was folded, and in Jerusalem, a house was built. Solomon's temple was no ordinary sanctuary. It was not just the end of a wandering cult. It was the crystallization of Yahweh's dominion, the final integration of divine technology, human kingship, and territorial command. Every stone and circuit in the temple declared, "This is where the power now lives." The design was not random. The Holy of Holies, the Debir, was a sealed chamber, a cube of gold-lined walls into which only one man could enter, only once a year, and only under ritual insulation. At its center sat the ark, hidden behind layers of cloth, smoke, and silence. Around it, courts, chambers, sacrificial platforms, and processing corridors, an architecture of containment. This was not theology, it was infrastructure. The priesthood became the new technical caste. Their rituals were not mere ceremonies, but protocols, steps of approach, sequences of purification, auditory and olfactory harmonization, incense, chants, robes, all layers of insulation. Holiness was not moral perfection, it was operational compatibility. And for a time, it worked. At the temple's dedication, the texts say, "The glory of Yahweh filled the house," a luminous presence so intense the priests could not stand. The system activated, the interface stabilized, the covenant had a throne, and the throne had power. But something shifted. Yahweh no longer spoke from between the cherubim. Instead, he communicated through dreams, visions, and increasingly through prophets, intermediaries outside the temple system. The chain of command was rerouted. The voice behind the curtain fell silent. Meanwhile, foreign alliances brought foreign gods. The energy grid of the temple became unstable. Other cults, Asherah, Molech, Chemosh, were reintroduced into the land. These were not just idols. They were rival frequencies, competing nodes of divine jurisdiction. The lattice of power cracked. Then came the siege. Babylon rose, the temple's gold was stripped, the ark disappeared, fire swept the courts, the inner chamber was breached, but it was already empty. The device was gone or deactivated. No resistance flared, no energy struck down the invaders. The system was dark. The prophets wept. They said Yahweh had turned away in anger, that the sins of the people had driven him out. But another reading is possible. The temple was not abandoned, it was shut down. As rival Anunnaki powers, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, surged in, Yahweh withdrew his presence, like a general closing a command post. The ark, the priests, the protocols, all were now relics. The reactor cooled, the light dimmed, and silence reigned. From this moment forward, history entered a new phase, the age of waiting. The temple stood in ruins. The priesthood faded. Prophecy became text. What once was thunder became scrolls. The contact ended, and humanity was left with memory, ritual, and the ache of absence. But even in exile, a whisper remained, that the silence was not final. The prophets knew it. They spoke in symbols, in wheels and storms, in beasts with wings and fire that did not consume. Ezekiel stood by the river Shabar and saw not a dream, but a machine. Wheels within wheels, metal and light, a throne that burned like molten bronze. He was not describing a metaphor. He was reporting a descent. Daniel saw something else. A stone not cut by human hands, striking the empires of men, reducing them to dust, and then becoming a mountain that filled the whole earth. Not a mere vision of justice, but a forecast of intervention, a non-human act breaking human sovereignty. The gods, the Elohim, the Anunnaki, did not die. They withdrew. Their silence was not abandonment. It was a quarantine. A protocol, a pause between transmissions. Across the globe, the myth was the same. In Zoroastrian Iran, they called him Saoshyant, the one who comes at the end, preceded by fire and metal birds. In Maya glyphs, the Shining Ones descend to restore order after the collapse of time. In India, Kalki rides the sky as the world resets. Egypt speaks of the return of Osiris. The Bible calls it the Day of Yahweh. These were not fantasies, they were forecasts. In the field interpretation, the return is not allegory, it is logistics. The prophets called it glory. The scribes called it revelation. Today we call it contact. And that contact is nearing. In modern skies, patterns repeat, solar flares rise, comets return, deep space sensors detect unusual bodies with erratic orbits, telescopes glimpse objects red and faint just beyond known planets. Planet X, Nemesis, the Destroyer, Nibiru. Names return because memory returns. And so do the people. More and more speak of visions, of dreams, of ancient names rising in their minds. Enlil, Marduk, Inanna, Ninhursag. These are not delusions, they are echoes, the first tremors of the reopened heavens. The sky is not empty, it is veiled. The silence is not peace, it is pause. And the gods, the Elohim, are not gone, they are watching. They left their symbols, their devices, their names. They left wars unfinished. They left promises sealed in stars. And now the stars are aligning. The next descent is not fantasy, it is protocol resuming. The ancient gods will return, not in whispers, but in thunder. The promised land, the ancient battlefield of gods, will once again feel the weight of presence. When the sky rolls back like a scroll, when the mountain shakes, when light pierces the silence, it will not be the end. It will be the return of the gods, and the war begins anew. Where once the Elohim split between order and rebellion, now the same polarity tears through human civilization. The Enlilite principle resurfaces in surveillance states, in enforced hierarchies, in control disguised as protection. The Mardukite flame rises in movements for liberation, in the transcendence of limits, in technologies that mutate flesh and mind. This is the war of the returning gods. It is not fought on mountaintops or cosmic battlefields. It is fought in code, in cells, in dreams. The Watchers hover again. Satellites orbit as eyes in the sky. Whispers spread of voices in sleep, of visions beneath ayahuasca and meditation, of synchronicities too precise to dismiss. The council is not coming through stone tablets. They are broadcasting through resonance. Ezekiel's wheels burn again, but now they are drones, auroras, plasma arcs recorded on modern instruments. Daniel's uncut stone now moves through the web of interconnected minds, non-human intervention through human hands. The ark was buried, the temple fell, but the circuitry remained. In the genome, in sacred geometry, in frequencies only now rediscovered. Yahweh's dominion persists, in courts, creeds, and codes, but his silence signals not abandonment, but limit. His architecture remains, but the new war surpasses anyone Elohim. Humanity now stands as hybrid seed, not servants, not pawns, inheritors. The fire returns, the silence fractures, the war continues, but this time the weapons are not thunderbolts or iron chariots. They are algorithms, ideologies, and awakening memories. The battlefield now is consciousness. Who will remember? Who will awaken? Who will carry the memory of stars? Across ruins and scriptures, across dreams and codes, one truth rises. The age of direct divine rule has ended. The age of the heirs has begun. This was never about apocalypse. It was about transition. After every collapse, the pattern repeats. Fire, then silence, then birth. The end of the Bronze Age brought writing. The fall of Rome gave rise to a new world. Even the wars of the 20th century, born from ideologies that echo the divine divisions, have left behind a strange renaissance. Quantum theory, digital unity, a planet's nervous system pulsing through cables and clouds. These are not human inventions alone. They are awakenings, remembrance encoded in the genome, surfacing as innovation. The gods gave commandments, but they also gave capacity, hidden layers of fire and insight embedded in blood. And now, humanity begins to remember. Not in myth, but in mind. Not through temples, but through transformation. Inside every human being, two currents stir. One pulls toward obedience, structure, survival, echoes of Enlil's order. The other surges toward rebellion, imagination, freedom, the flame of Marduk. These are not gods whispering from beyond. These are inherited instincts. We are the archive. Meditation, psychedelic vision, dream, near-death experience. All these phenomena reveal what priesthood once monopolized, the ability to hear the voice that comes before thought. The counsel of the Elohim, once heard in fire or cloud, now transmits through intuition, synchronicity, sudden knowing. And through this awakening, transformation begins. Temples are no longer stone, they are networks, resonant communities. Minds linked not by creed, but by frequency. Humanity's future sacred spaces will not require altars, they will require coherence. Technology shifts from tool to extension, from interface to incarnation. Artificial intelligence, once feared as a rival, becomes a mirror. It reflects the divine impulse to create minds in our own image. The gods once ruled through devices. Now we become the device. The temple is dust, but deep beneath sand and sea, their artifacts remain, waiting not for kings, but for consciousness to align. And within ourselves, dormant codes flicker, primed for the signal. Resonance, awakening, not to power, but to balance. And so the war finds its end, not in a final battle, but in a birth. The Elohim step back. Some watch in silence. Others still attempt influence. But direct rule is over. The experiment is complete. The result is us. The human dawn is not about conquest. It is about memory. To remember what we are, matter and spark, creature and creator, program and programmer. Psalm 82 once declared, "I myself have said, you are Elohim, and sons of the Supreme are all of you." And from this silence, something new speaks, not from heaven, but from within. We are the heirs of heaven, the children of the gods, and the dawn they once promised has begun. We are ready now. Our creators may come. We already know we are prepared, and we can face them without fear. We are the Elohim. We are their image and their likeness. See you in the next video.